Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Finance to Teachers webinar, Finance Teachers Network webinar for April. My name is Dave Grant. I am going to be moderating and hosting the webinar today, and I will fill you in a little bit about our guests and about the network and about myself, and then we'll crack on with our content. First, we're going to cover a little bit of housekeeping so I can make sure that everyone knows how the session is going to run and how you can get involved. So today, everyone is on mute right now. The way we're going to communicate with each other is by using the chat box that you'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have any questions for Dan as we go through, throw them in the chat box, and we'll get to those questions at the end once we've covered some of the initial questions in the session. For right now, if you wouldn't mind confirming with us that you're hearing everything and you're seeing everything okay, putting a 1 in the chat box. If you're having issues with seeing or hearing things, go ahead and put a 2, and then we'll make sure that we can fix these as we go along. Now, the Finance for Teachers Network, if you are new on the webinar, I'm not really sure what it's about. The Finance for Teachers Network is a group of financial advisors around the country really wanting to focus on serving K-12 and college-level educators. So we really want to focus on that market and serving those people as clients. Also understanding exactly what we're going through as advisors and how we can help each other, and really get a lot of tools from different coaches and different professionals in the field. Now, the webinars that we have each month, some are private member-only webinars, others are open to everybody. This one is public and open to everybody. Next month, which I will tell you about later, is actually going to be a private webinar just for members. But let's crack on with today's. My name is Dave Grant. I am the founder of the network. I'm a certified financial planner and run my own RIA as well. With me today is Dan Otter. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Dan with his work in the 403b world and being very vocal out there about how to make these plans better. So Dan, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Me and Dan have known each other for a couple of years. We've spoken on the phone a lot of times about what is going on in the 403b space and how things can be made better and how educators can be served more effectively. But Dan, I'm going to let you do your own introduction so I can let you give yourself the most credit there. So why don't you kick us up there?
Sure. I'm currently a teacher at the University of New Mexico, but before that I was a long-time elementary, middle, and high school teacher. I've taught for over a decade. I taught in Southern California, I taught in Maryland, and I've taught in New Mexico. 403bwise is a coming together of 3 of my interests. I was a journalism major in college at San Diego State, and when I graduated, I worked for a small startup. There was this term called desktop publishing, so we were producing this small magazine in Corona, California called Corona This Month. And as part of my job, I would interview teachers, I would go to school board meetings, and I was kind of becoming involved with schools. Also, my wife was a teacher. She was an elementary school teacher, and I would go in and help her with the kids. So 4 years after graduation, I transitioned into teaching. And something very interesting happened to me about my 3rd month on the job. I was teaching a 4-5 combination, which should be illegal. No first-year teacher should ever be given 2 grades. But anyway, it was the end of the day, the kids had left, and there was a knock on my door. And I was at the front getting stuff ready, the board, getting stuff ready for the next day, and a lady walks in and says, do you care about your financial future? And wow, that was like a left field comment coming after working with kids all day. And she started talking about these things I had no idea about. I think I remember terms like TSAs, and she said, I helped the 3rd grader down the hallway, and she had all the paperwork already filled out. And I remember 2 sort of distinct thoughts. I didn't like someone just bursting into my classroom, and I didn't like that I had no idea what she was talking about. Now, I had some vague notion that I had a pension through CalSTRS, so I knew that was a solid way to save for retirement, but I had no idea about any supplemental plan. There had been no education by my school district about this. So this was, I believe, 1993, 92. So I kind of shooed her out and didn't do anything. And then a couple of years later, I started getting interested in investing. This is when CNBC had just kind of become a bigger thing on cable news. And again, this is internet days. So that's, cable news was where I was getting a lot of my information on how to invest. I subscribed to Money Magazine. I remember they had a cover, something like 401k Nation. And it seems like all the news was about 401ks. And so I was wondering, boy, what do we have for teachers? And at the time, a friend of mine at the time was working for Merrill Lynch. And I asked him, I said, look, I keep hearing about 401ks. I know I have a pension. What about us teachers? And that's the first time I heard the term 403b. His name was Kirk. And he said, oh, yeah, you have a 403b. And I told him about that lady coming into my classroom. And he laughed. He said, yep, that's a sales agent. She's an insurance person. She's selling high-fee products. Don't do that. So he told me what to do, and I was very lucky. In California at the time, and even a little bit today, we have massive vendor lists. So I had over 100 so-called choices, but at the bottom of my list was Vanguard. And I knew enough at that point that was a great company to invest with. So I started a 403b with Vanguard, and I was very lucky because most teachers don't have Vanguard. I have no idea why that was on the list, but I felt very fortunate. So I would sit in the staff lounge and I would hear teachers talk about their guy or their girl, and they would describe how they're saving for retirement, and I would ask them, do they know what they're investing in? And they didn't. They said, oh, my guy or girl takes care of everything. And I said, do you know how much you're paying? And they said, oh, there's no fees, doesn't cost anything. Of course, we know that's false. And so I said, tell you what, why don't you bring in your statements and I'll take a look. And again, I was no expert at the time, but I was able to find out little areas where fees were being charged, and they were quite shocked at this. And someone suggested, why don't you start teaching teachers about this or write a book or something? And so this was late 1999, and this is when the internet was kind of exploding, where people could just sort of start websites and blogs and attract some attention. So a friend of mine who lived nearby was a teacher, and he had the same concerns, and we started working offline on a website where we could help teachers understand how 403bs work and the importance of low-cost investing. And we did a really smart thing, and I credit my friend John Moore with this. We bought the domain name 403bwise. And we wrestled with a bunch of different names, and John said, I think we have to have the term 403b in the name. And then I came up with the idea of wise, so be wise, 403b wise. So that was a really wise decision by us. And we launched in March 2000. And within 2 months, we were featured or mentioned in U.S. News and World Report. And then I got interviewed on NPR, and that was an amazing experience. At the time, I felt like I knew about the plan, but I wasn't an expert, and I had all these IRS documents in front of me as they were interviewing me, and I managed to survive the interview, and we were able to track visitorship, and it just soared after the airing of that. And then companies like TIAA-CREF began approaching us about advertising, and to this day, we just refuse to take advertising from high-fee companies. I've had AXA reach out through a third party wanting to advertise with us, and for a pretty substantial amount of money, and we just have chosen not to do that. We only accept advertising from companies that we ourselves either invest in or would invest in. Just the last couple things here before I wrap up. I've written 3 books. The first one, the 403bwise Guide, which is out of print, which we plan to update. My current book, Teach and Retire Rich. And then I wrote one aimed at my daughter's age. She's a high school senior. It's also for people in college. It's called Financial Literacy for the Young and Young at Heart. And then as Dave knows, we launched our podcast, the Teach and Retire Rich podcast, which we did that last spring. And incidentally, if anyone wants to hear Dave, we interviewed Dave in episode 12. And you can access that from our homepage at 403bwise.com or through iTunes. And I'll just conclude my introduction here. As Dave knows, we are very busy right now because we are doing a major redesign of the website, and we hope to launch Sunday evening. And we're going to have separate sections for K-12, higher ed, and healthcare. So that's a little bit of a long-winded introduction, Dave.
No, I think that gives people a good shape of where you've come from and how you've gotten to this. So I think that's helpful. And it almost seems like I'll scratch your back situation. Yeah, I've been on your podcast. Now welcome to our webinar. So thank you for being involved, and I think the community is quite engaged in the education space. So I think a lot of people know each other, and it's good to help each other out.
I agree, and we're thrilled to have folks like you, Dave. You are exactly the kind of advisor we want to see in this market. And while I still think we have a long way to go to improve things, I'm very encouraged with the direction we're heading.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny when people like myself actually get a little bit of a platform, then other people who are similar to myself in their philosophy and the way they do work, they start coming forward because now it's an okay thing to do. So I know a lot of our community who are members of the network or who are not members yet, they all share the same philosophy I do and really want to do the fiduciary work for educators.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people around the country who want to do the right thing. And I think when they find, your network, they find you, they find me, we become powerful together. And like I said earlier, I'm very encouraged. I think we're slowly building a sustainable movement.
No, I definitely agree. All right, well, let's jump into some questions that get a little bit more detailed. And the topic of this session is all about 403b, so let's really kind of dig deep into that. So as you've been around the 403b world as a teacher, as an educator, and also on the other side as being an advocate, what do you think advisors need to understand about the 403b world?
Sure, and as you know, Dave, there's really two 403b worlds. There's the ERISA world, and that would be public colleges, public hospitals. But I'm guessing for the majority of your audience and my audience, we're talking about non-ERISA plans. So this is the K-12 market, the public school higher ed market. And one of the biggest things to know is there are not a lot of quality choices. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but by and large, if you look at any random school district around the country, they're going to have anywhere from 5 to probably 30 vendor choices, and overwhelmingly, they are going to be high-fee insurance products. Now, there are some school districts like Montgomery County Public Schools outside of Washington, D.C., who just went to a single vendor. They now exclusively offer Fidelity. So that's a interesting, unique development. We're hoping to interview them for a podcast. Incidentally, I actually taught in Montgomery County, and we helped advise them and work with them a little bit on this. But I think that's the first thing an advisor has to know. If they're familiar with the 401k market, they're going to come into this and say, oh, great, I'm going to help you, with a lot of your financial picture. Let's look at your 403b. Oh, wait, you've got something with 3% in fees or a 7-year surrender charge. So the product that's available is generally not that good. And that's a big push for 403bwise. Our motto is education and advocacy, and so we're trying to push back and get school districts to offer better plans. I think the second thing to know is that especially with K-12 teachers, they are unbelievably busy. If you know, Dave, you know a teacher well. If your audience knows teachers well, they'll know that they work unbelievably hard, and they're physically exhausted during the school year. So they're pretty busy. They, by and large, know that they have pensions, and pensions are taking all different shapes and size and forms now as states begin to, change pension plans, particularly for new hires. But I think at the end of the day, these teachers still need to look at supplemental savings. And I think the 403b can be a good way to go. But as we've talked about, Dave, not always. If you've only got bad choices, I think it's probably better to decline and maybe look at a 457. A lot of school districts offer 457B plans, and by design, they require more employer oversight, more of a fiduciary duty. So what your audience might find is 457B offerings that are superior to 403B offerings. Some other thoughts. Teachers, again, this is very anecdotal, but they tend to be pretty conservative. I think that plays into the hands of annuity salespeople who pitch fixed annuities and things like equity indexed annuities, which are just I think a terrible product. They promise the upside of the market with no downside, and I think we know that's not possible. And a lot of teachers have no idea what a 403B is. They've heard the term TSA, tax sheltered annuity, and this gives the false impression that they have to invest in annuity products. And by and large, there are some exceptions, TIAA-CREF, Vanguard, Fidelity. Most annuity products cost a lot more than straight mutual fund products. So that's something to know. It's going to require education. And for too long, the 403B market has been all about sales, education through sales. When you have to compete against 35 other vendors, it becomes a great big sales pitch. And our hope is that it becomes more education. So I think advisors in your group will have to do, earn trust through education. I think teachers are terrific people. I think they're greater good people. I have really enjoyed my colleagues over the years at different schools in different states. I think advisors would enjoy working with teachers. In our podcast 23, as you know, Dave, planner Scott Downhauer, he's been in this market for a long time, and he discussed ways that advisors can serve the K-12 market. So your audience might enjoy, in addition to your material, might enjoy listening to that. But I would say that's sort of an overview of what they, I guess a couple other things. Unions exert a lot of influence, and much of it is negative. The National Education Association, the NEA, the biggest teachers union, has for years endorsed a financial company, Security Benefits, which offers some products that have fees of over 5%, have surrender fees. And they call their product the NEA Value Builder. And I think this is really nefarious because let's say you're a third grade teacher in Illinois and maybe you've heard of the 403B and you'd like to start one and you're not sure what to do, but then you see our big union, NEA, as part of the name, the NEA Value Builder. Maybe I'll do that because surely my union would be looking out for me. But when it comes to the 403B, they're not. In California, the CTA has done some really good things, but I also think they've done some poor things. In California, this is just an insane situation. We have a law that's been in place since 1969 that prevents school districts and community colleges from putting their 403B plans out to competitive bid. So anytime there's been talk of doing this and allowing it, there's been a couple legislative efforts. The insurance industry has, lobbied up and spent millions of dollars to prevent this. And even the CTA fought recent efforts to allow competitive bidding. So this is not an easy market. As we alluded to earlier, I think it's getting better. And I would encourage your audience, your advisors, to work in this market because we need them. We need fiduciary advisors who will do the right thing because I think they can help drive change at the grassroots level as well. So I would say those are the things they would need to keep in mind.
And you raised a lot of good points there. And a couple of things I want to pull out there is you mentioned your podcast, and I definitely want to say, for people who haven't listened to the 403bwise podcast, Teach for Retire Rich, go to iTunes and subscribe. There's some really kind of meaty discussions going on there, and ones that are, they're kind of raw as well. And I kind of want to pick up on your last one that you did, and it's not going to give any spoilers, but that one really kind of stopped me in my tracks and made me listen for the personal side of things that are going on.
Yeah, that was a tough one to do for sure. But I ultimately believe it'll be very valuable for listeners.
Yeah. I think one thing you mentioned about unions being, quite aggressive, and they may not have the right approach to this whole 403b game. One thing I've also found is business managers. They're the ones who are ultimately responsible for a vendor list. But a lot of them have a lot of apathy towards this whole thing because they keep getting pitched by companies to get on the list. They keep, having to have conversations with their employees about what they can and can't do as business managers in that relationship. And even as an advisor, if you go and try and talk to a business manager, it is very easy to get shut down, just because this is a benefit that, according to government rules, they are not allowed to have a lot of oversight on. They are allowed to provide the benefit, but it is outside of their jurisdiction that they can actually provide guidance on. So I would suggest advisors don't get too, put out by the fact that business managers don't want to talk to you or don't want to entertain any conversations about you getting involved in the district, because this is just something they have to deal with, and it's just another line item on their list.
I agree, Dave. I've had some let's just call it spirited conversations with business managers over the years, and the point I try to make, look, you're a participant too. If your teachers only have bad choices, that means you only have bad choices. And you've probably found this, Dave, they are overwhelmingly concerned about compliance issues. That is their number one sort of factor in their decision-making process. And I also probably should have touched on the third-party administrator. Once, a little history on the 403b, it predates the 401k by 20 years. It started in 1958. And in many ways, it's just still very much behind the 401k. But starting in the early 2000s, the IRS started scrutinizing these plans and found very few of them in compliance. There was a lot of at the time you could transfer out of your own plan and into a plan that's not controlled by your employer. This was called a 90-24 transfer, and they've ended 90-24 out-of-plan transfers, which used to be an escape hatch to get, let's say, Vanguard or Fidelity if it wasn't on your vendor list. So the IRS implemented new regulations. They went fully into effect in 2009, and it required a little bit more of employers. And anyone familiar with school districts knows they don't have a lot of extra money. So in some ways, the 403b can even be a headache for them, a compliance headache. So there are some really good TPAs, and there are some really poor TPAs, just like any other profession. And these folks will come in and they'll say, we will provide compliance at no charge, but they're also going to have their so-called preferred vendors, and they're getting kickbacks from these preferred vendors. So it's not objective advice. So I think your mention of business managers, I think, is a good one. I think the TPAs tie into this.
Yeah, I agree. It's something I've had first-hand knowledge with, and it's not encouraging to hear sometimes the things they have to say.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's kind of move on, and you may have alluded to this in one of your answers, but as you've been working in the space for a while, what changes have you seen in the 403b landscape, and what kind of impact do you think it's had?
I'm actually encouraged. It's better today than it was in 2000 when we launched. And I realize that's 16 years of a time span, but the new regulations, for the first time, at the very minimum, they got school districts to pay attention to the 403b. And again, what's required of employers in non-ERISA plans is not to the level of what's required of employers in ERISA plans. However, I think two things have been helpful. One is the requirement of a written plan. And again, this is not like a full plan document, which you would see in a ERISA-based 403b plan. But this got school districts to at least put their information about their plan in writing. And I think that's helpful. At least they're focusing on it. And the other thing was this, it's called universal availability. And every employer has to make every eligible participant aware of their ability to participate. I do talks around the country to teacher groups. Schools will bring me in, financial firms, I've even had advisors bring me in. And I'll often get someone, not so much anymore because of these new rules, but I would get maybe someone who works in the office of, let's say, middle school come up to me and say, I am super frustrated. I've been working in this school district for 20 years and nobody told me I was eligible to participate in the 403b plan. So I think that's helpful. One of the issues I probably should have mentioned earlier was that most school districts, most 403b plans are individual contracts. So all these teachers, each teacher has a relationship with a different vendor. And that makes it very hard for a school district, even if they want to change to one low-cost provider. So what we're seeing is some school districts are trying to move to group contracts. They're closing the old individual contracts, they're bringing in a new vendor or vendors, and they're moving to more of a group contract arrangement. And that has a lot of benefits because then school districts, especially those not in California, can put their plans out to bid and get better pricing. So I think that's encouraging. You're seeing less vendors. And that sounds bad, right? We sort of equate choice with always being a good thing. But in California, and this always is, people find this remarkable, in the early 2000s, the Los Angeles Unified Schools District had more than 200 vendors, Dave. Can you imagine aggregating all of those contributions on a monthly basis? How inefficient and time-consuming that would have been? So today, there's about 30 vendors. So we're seeing vendor consolidation. We are seeing a very slow move to mutual funds from insurance products. So these are the improvements I'm seeing. But of course, we still have some of the same problems. The insurance industry is fighting this change tooth and nail. And just this week, I don't know if you even saw Scott Downhower's writing about this in his blog, the NTSA, the National Tax Deferred Savings Association, they used to be called the NTSSA, I think, and they actually came out to Los Angeles when LA Unified was making noise about challenging that law in California that prevents school districts from putting their plans out to bid. They actually came to a LAUSD meeting, and it was like kabuki theater, Dave, because one of the people in attendance asked Brian Graff, who was in charge of that organization at the time, well, what do you invest in? What does your employer offer? And here, this group, which doesn't want teachers to be able to, their employers to be able to competitively bid their 403Bs, they have one provider, and I think it was Vanguard. I mean, you want to talk about irony. Anyway, this group, which has changed its name to NTSA, they recently helped defeat potential legislation to smooth the path for auto-enrollment for public employees in California. And companies like Valak, Plan Member Services, Lincoln Investments, and American Fidelity, not to be confused with Fidelity Investments, were behind this. So, again, very frustrating.
And that move, I did read that this morning, that sounds very counterintuitive. Like, why would you not want all the educators to be auto-enrolled? And in the self-interest of all the brokers, you would be getting more money in that case.
I agree, Dave.
So it's still an interesting space out there. All right, so we have danced around 403bwise, and I know you mentioned it in your introduction, but really give us an insight into 403bwise, its aims and objectives.
Sure. I mentioned our slogan. It is education and advocacy. We want to be a place for participants, employers, advisors come, get educated on how the 403b works, and then we're also very much pushing reform. Advocacy is the second part of our description, education and advocacy. We are advocating for schools and employers to offer better, lower cost choices. And we're also big supporters, Dave, of the CFP model. We are very much in favor of these kind of planners getting involved in this market, because for far too long it's been salespeople, like the story I began with, having someone come into my classroom. So we're trying to really promote that approach to advisement, because I think if you talk to 100 teachers, I would say 90 of them would be more comfortable with a human being to talk to. So I think there's potential for advisors to do it the right way. And we mentioned this big redesign we're doing. We're going to be expanding our focus now from K-12 into higher ed and healthcare. And now that I teach at the university, I'm in the higher ed market, and it's in many ways it's much better. We have only, at the University of New Mexico, we only have, I think it's 4 vendors, and one is Fidelity and one is TIAA-CREF. And because both companies have sponsored 403bwise, and because I think both are quality companies, I have my 457 with Fidelity and I have my 403b with TIAA-CREF. And I was able to sign up online. There's been a simple process. I can change my contribution levels every month. There was no sales agent coming into my classroom. But what's interesting is there's not a team of advisors contacting me. I did get a phone call from a Dallas-based TIAA-CREF planner. But so I would tell your audience too, look at the higher ed market. And again, we're going to be providing more material. We're going to have 4 tabs at the top of the redesigned website. One's going to say K-12, one's going to say higher ed, one's going to say healthcare, and one's going to say, we're not sure whether to say advisors or advising, but we're going to be encouraging advisors to contribute articles, answer questions on our discussion board. There's a little preview here. We've met a very interesting college professor who teaches at Northridge in Los Angeles. She is a professor and she's a CFP who has her own planning firm, and she's going to write the first article for us for that section about what higher ed employees need to know about saving for retirement. So I would say that's, our mission has not changed, but we're just sort of expanding and addressing a wider audience, I believe.
Well, that's interesting, because we have members inside the network who are focused on college. So whenever they come and join, I'm a little jealous, because like you said, it's very much a different system, and it's a lot more fluid and easy to understand for both advisors and for participants as well, versus the K-12 market.
I agree. I knew an advisor here who, I don't think he's in Albuquerque anymore, but he was with TIAA-CREF, and he actually focused his time on the medical school and the law school, because that's where the money is at the University of New Mexico. The salaries of those folks are much greater than the salaries of people like me in the College of Education. So, these people, some of them are practicing doctors. They're doctors and instructors. And so that would be a fertile market, I think, for advisors to look at.
Yeah, and we definitely have, advisors serving the college level educators come with very different questions inside the network. They're saying, the professor I work with is tenured and has a salary, but he is also selling textbooks on the side and updating every year. And us K-12 advisors are like, well, I don't deal with that problem. Let's find you someone who can actually help with that problem, because it's something we don't touch. There's definitely different worlds, even though it's the same education realm.
I agree. And, on the healthcare sector, I've been corresponding with a gentleman out of Washington whose sister works for a public hospital. I believe it's in Washington or Oregon. I'm forgetting now, but Pacific Northwest. And they have a terrible 403b. It's offered by, I want to say Prudential, and it's not a lot of low-cost offerings. So while a lot of these issues are pertinent to K-12, even in these other markets, there still is a need for education and a need in some cases for better product offerings.
Well, that's going to be a new bowl game for you guys. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and again, it's nice having been in two markets to sort of see what it's like. But again, I think the most change has to still occur at the K-12 level.
Yeah. One thing you didn't mention, which has probably been the biggest benefit to me in 403bwise, is the forum. That place is a hotbed for discussion, and there's a lot of core members who, are contributing most days, and they're throwing questions out there. There's new teachers coming on with very detailed questions, and a lot of the members are very knowledgeable about what they can do and what they can't do. And sometimes when, even as an advisor living in this world, and I get to those questions, it's already been answered by people who aren't an advisor. So it's really great to see a lot of educated people on the forums at 403bwise and really willing to help.
And I appreciate that you mentioning that, Dave, and I appreciate your participation. You have helped raise the level of quality of answers, and we're very proud of our discussion board. We do feel like over the years we've built this community, this national community, and one of the most typical things is someone finds out about us. They've been investing for 10 years in a high-fee company, and they're pretty upset, and they'll post their vendor choices. And as you mentioned, Dave, folks like yourself, other teachers, other planners will provide, I think, some really quality advice. So if anyone out there, has not participated, we encourage you to do that. We will need you to register, and then I'll approve you. We just get, every day there's like 10 attempted spam registrants, so I have to go in and individually approve. Usually I look at those every morning, but if you are an advisor out there and who wants to participate immediately and you've registered, shoot me an email at dan@403bwise.com, and I will, assuming I'm not teaching, I will immediately go in there and approve you, and you can begin posting right then. And so what we're thinking of doing, Dave, is we're thinking of having individual boards each market. So we might have a K-12 discussion board, a higher ed discussion board, a healthcare discussion board. So that's what we're thinking of doing when we launch this redesign. Do you have any opinions on that?
I actually think that's a great idea. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, that even though higher ed and K through 12 teach, the benefit side of both of those are very different. And so I think should a college professor come along and say, I'm having these issues, a K through 12 specialist may not have the best answers. You probably need to be a higher ed specialist to give the best insight. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of our thinking. So I appreciate hearing your feedback on that. And again, we have no problem with advisors coming on. We've had some people in the past, like, way over promoting themselves, and I don't think that's the way to go. I think it's to do like what you're doing. You've provided terrific, balanced, quality feedback for a number of years. You've built up this trust within our community. And I would tell anyone, who wants to look for an advisor, I always point to you, Dave, especially when I get inquiries from Illinois, and they can go back and look at how you've answered, on our discussion board. So I think it's a great place for advisors.
Agreed. And I will put a feeler out to members out there. If I get referrals from Dan that are not in Illinois, I kick it out to the network. I don't typically take referrals out of state because I don't want to learn other states' pension plans.
Sure. It's like being a lawyer, right? You have to, it's state by state.
Oh, it really is. All right. Well, let's kick on. There's another site that you've been involved in called 403b Compare that I'd love to get your insight on and tell us what it is and how it's moving forward.
Sure. 403b Compare is one of the best 403b secrets out there. And what it is, it's a website run by the state of California where any vendor selling product in the K-12 and community college network has to register with this website and provide detailed fee information. So I think right now there's over 60 vendors on 403b Compare. And so teachers can search, or advisors, or anyone can search. You can search by school district. So if you're a teacher in California, you find your school district you work in, and then you click vendors, and you're immediately taken to all the vendors that are available to you. You can also search by vendor. And what's great about this, it's not just for people in California, because chances are if a product is offered in California, it's offered in Illinois, it's offered in Ohio, Pennsylvania. So it is a really, in my mind, even though it's state-run, it's a national database of fees. And the reason this came about, and I was a consultant on it, was way back in 2001. 403bwise had just launched, and we were approached by TIACREF, and I forget the other organization. They wanted to get into the K-12 market at the time and were concerned about barrier to entry because of this insurance code I had spoken about earlier, preventing school districts from putting their plans out to bid. The insurance industry wrote this code way back in 1969, and so what you had was that situation like in Los Angeles where you had over 200 vendors. So there was some folks putting some might behind changing this. We even got a legislator in California to sponsor it, and that was my introduction to the world of money and finance. This idea greatly threatens a multi-million, maybe even multi-billion-dollar insurance industry. And they fought back tooth and nail. And I don't know if I already told you this, Dave. Opponents of this effort to change legislation bought the domain name 403bwise.org and 403bwise.net. So at that time, someone may have heard of our website and knew that it was run by teachers, but if they put in the wrong ending of the URL, they put in net or org, they would go to a group whose message was the antithesis of ours. And so that was pretty eye-opening. Anyway, long story short, the insurance industry won, and efforts to get this legislation passed were defeated. But the one compromise was the creation of 403bcompare.com. And so I think it took about 2 years to roll this out. I was a consultant on the participant side, and Scott Downhauer was a participant on the industry side. And he would tell me about the meetings he would be in. And it became very clear the insurance industry were doing everything they could, not all, but many in it, were doing whatever they could to sort of slow walk this. And they would have big debates over fee schedules and what should be shared. But anyway, somehow this thing got built, and it's there for everyone in the country to use. And my understanding is they're in the process of doing a redesign. So I think it's an amazing resource, and I think it's only going to get better.
That's good. I agree. It is one of those hidden gems out there. And I popped in there today, and I think a redesign is pretty much overdue.
Yeah.
But I think the power of that website is immense.
I agree.
All right, we do have some attendee questions coming through, so I'm going to skip our next question and go to the last two. So, we've got advisors on the call, that's a given. How, in your opinion, can they serve educators in the best way?
One, be a fiduciary, okay? Because this market has been flooded with salespeople. So be a fiduciary. I know through the CFP training that's part of it. We have a fiduciary pledge on our website that we ask our visitors who are participants to have their planners sign. I would say, earlier I mentioned sort of the makeup of teachers. I think they're a little bit conservative, but I think they're great people. I think just be fair and honest. I think our Teach and Retire Rich podcast 23 Scott in particular really lays out how to work with this market. But that would be my advice. Just don't ignore this market. I think while there are barriers, I think it can be a very fruitful market.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be some knock-on effects of the DOL ruling that came out last week. As things get more strict with annuity sales, there could be some knock-on effects over to the K through 12 side of how these agents start to approach that market.
I agree.
I think there'll be a definite differentiation between those who are intent on selling products to make an income versus those taking a fiduciary approach and serving in the best manner they can.
Exactly, and as you know, sadly, because it's non-ERISA, the new fiduciary requirements do not relate to the K-12, or not required of the K-12, the non-ERISA markets. But however, we finally have had a national conversation about what a fiduciary is. So I would, if I'm an advisor, that would be like the first thing I would say, and that's the way you can build trust.
All right. Our last question that I have scheduled for you, and then we'll get to our other questions. So if you were looking for an advisor on a personal level and as an educator, what would you be looking for?
Well, the first thing would be CFP. I think that would be a minimum requirement before I even entertain the conversation. On our homepage, we have a list of advisor questions. So I would encourage participants to download that list and ask those questions. And, some of the questions are, because what happens a lot in the market is these teachers will meet a salesperson at a lunch they provide and they never have another interaction. So I think frequent interaction is important. I think actually working with that advisor as opposed to assistants is important. But again, we have a whole listing of the questions we would recommend any participant ask an advisor. And I'd also be looking for English ones, because I think English ones are really polite, Dave.
I'll just see my mailbox is flood right now. I'm like, you're not English? What? No, it's funny you mentioned that. I was in a prospective meeting the other day, and it came up that I wasn't from the country. It was me and another advisor in the meeting. And the next 10 minutes revolved around my personal story, and these prospective clients were just encapsulated by the fact that I'm an immigrant from England. And I'm like, don't let this sway your decision. I could be an awful advisor, but I'm glad that my story just brought you in.
Yeah, I think we like the English, and I also would say be married to a teacher. So if there are any single advisors out there, marry a teacher. That's a really good way to enter this market.
It's funny you say that. The majority of advisors I speak to who are working with the market have a family tie to it. It's either their mother or their wife. And it's uncanny how many conversations I have with people like that. Or they've been a teacher themselves. It's a really personal tie into the market.
I agree. I think a lot of people they're aggrieved when they hear what's going on in this market, and they look at it as a cause to some degree. And I like that kind of enthusiasm.
Agreed. Yeah, when you have that personal story to it, it makes it that much more powerful.
I always cringe when we hear these national sort of attacks on teachers. But the irony is, from what I've seen, study after study, when you question people on education, just in general, there's a negative sort of connotation. But if you ask about your children's teachers, well, everybody seems to like their children's teachers. So there's a real disconnect out there in perception and reality.
It is true. All right, we have about 10 minutes to get to music questions here. One's coming about compensation, and it says, what kind of compensation do you think is reasonable for advisors, and how should they be paid? This could be approached from various different directions. I'm going to let you tackle it first, and then I may throw some thoughts in as well.
Yeah, and again, I'm not 100%. I'm no expert in planner compensation, but I believe it should be. I like the fee-based model. And again, if you're a fiduciary, you're not going to be recommending product that benefits you at the expense of the client. So I am in favor of the fee-based model.
Yeah. Anyone who's aware of myself, I have drunk the Kool-Aid of fee only, um, and you know, I'm even cautious of advisors who can sell a 403b as well as providing advice, because you do enter into another level of conflicts of interest there, even though there may not be. I mean, it may be the best interest of the client. And, I'm unapologetically drinking the Kool-Aid now. I still do. But I think it's a case of, as an advisor, you should be paid foremost by the clients. You should not be receiving any type of compensation for any products that you provide. And I know that gets a lot of kickback and hate from the industry, but that's one thing I think a consumer wants to see. They want to know that the person that's giving them advice is truly giving them advice and not providing products and services that they would get compensated by on the back end. In terms of what's reasonable, I think you have to look at it from the consumer side. If you are to line up a financial advisor along with different services that people are going to bring into their home, a plumber, electrician, contractor, landscaper, if you're earning 7 times what a contractor does that seem reasonable to you? I even go on the far end of, I think an hourly advisor has so much more value than someone who charges AUM. I think it's more in the interest of the consumer at that point. I think it's a case of you definitely get what you pay for. I am become jaded on the AUM model, and I don't really think it serves in the best interest of clients. Once their money increases, their advisor gets paid more for providing not that much extra value. So it's something that advisors have to check themselves on. I think there's a lot of different opinions out there, and no one's going to have the same one. I think as long as what you mentioned, Dan, if you're acting as a fiduciary, you're putting your client's interests first and eliminating as many conflicts of interest as you can, then I think you're going to find a good balance there.
Dave, it's very interesting to hear your thoughts on this. And another thing I'll say is Scott has often talked about going with this fee-only model. It can be a challenge when you're starting your firm, your in business for yourself, because you don't have that salary, you don't have those sales commissions to live on. And I believe in that podcast 23, Scott talks about those challenges. I don't know if you want to speak to any of those kind of issues.
It is hard. When you are looking for those initial clients and the only way you're going to get paid is through the income that comes from your clients, it is very much a feast or famine situation. If you compare that path to someone who is a commission-based advisor and will get an 8% kick on any product they sell, you'll be making a lot more money a lot quicker, providing you can close sales very fast. But I think you really have to look out for, okay, what is fair in the situation here? But also, what are you looking to build long term? Are you looking to build these transaction-based relationships where either you don't check in with these people for another 8 years, or you're servicing them for free because you did get that big kick at the start? Or are you looking to build relationship-based clients where, yes, they will pay you over time, and as your client book grows, you'll get more and more income, but you're building a lot of value into these relationships as well. But you'll just have to be patient. So it is hard in the initial days, and I'm not going to lie there, I'm still there. But it's a case of when you sit in front of a client, is this a transaction or is this a relationship? And I think that's going to be the key to whether people continue to build their practices and what type of reputation they get and the feedback they get. A lot of the 403b advisors I get and hear from current clients is, I haven't heard from them in X amount of years, and there's whispers around them in the 403b lounge that they haven't really done the best job. That is the nail in the coffin in my career if I was in that situation. My reputation is what I stand by. So if that's starting to be your reputation, your career is starting to get into some hot water there.
Dave, I really like how you phrased that, a transaction versus a relationship. And, just a couple of quick things. I think the long-term benefits will pay off. I've seen them firsthand with Scott. I've known Scott for 16 years, and when we were first working together, it was a little bit of a challenge when he was getting started. Now he almost literally has to turn away business. So I think this model that he's pursued and you're pursuing has long-term benefits. Also, I think your network that you've created, you are providing a head start for people. The people on this call today might have taken 6 months to a year to learn the things that I think you are sharing with them right up front, and I think that'll help the payoff hasten the payoff.
And that's the intent, and that's really where the networks come from. Everything that I've tried to build for advisors is coming off the back of 2 years of learning it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a case of let's get everything in front of advisors who want to be in a similar position where I am. But yeah, take that 2 years that I spent learning and accelerate it into 6 months, and let's save you time.
Yeah.
Dan, that has come to the end of the questions we have time for, and it looks like we're just at the top of the hour, so we're right on time. I want to thank you very much for coming. That was a lot of information, and I know that a lot of people have got resources here that they are going to be using. I'm hoping to see some of them on the 403bwise forums as well.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. Thanks for what you do. I will look forward to continuing to interact with you and seeing you on 403bwise, and I'll shoot you hopefully not too late Sunday night. I'll let you know when we finally go live with the redesign.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. That'll be good.
So am I.
For those listening on the webinar, if you are not members and you're interested in joining, you can go to the financialteachersnetwork.com website to learn more. If you have questions at that point, you can set up a call with me and we can talk one-on-one. If you are confident signing up there, there's a pricing section. You can sign up for a membership, which is $50 a month. Next month's webinar is a members-only webinar. It is with Mary Beth Kosmeski. She runs Red Zone Marketing, and she does marketing just for financial advisors around the country. So she's going to be discussing strategies for acquiring new business, primarily in the K-12 and higher ed space. I think this is going to be very valuable. It's things that are going to go above and beyond what our members currently have in their resource folder, and I think this can be very actionable. So if you're a member, look out for those invitations. If you want to get in on this webinar, and you're not a member, then make sure you join by May, and we'll get you those details. Well, Dan, thanks so much. I know we'll be talking in the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing the site next week, and the best of luck.
Thank you very much, Dave, and same to you. I think you've got a terrific organization here.
It's my baby. It's growing. It's a good one. All right. Thanks, Dan. And everyone else, take care, and we'll see you in May.
Okay. Take care. Bye.